story this morning. The Metro Police in Joburg say they've now arrested a group of adults. They filmed themselves smoking a drug that's believed to be mandrax. They then encouraged a young child to smoke it as well. In fact, on social media, the video shows the young boy lighting drugs in a bottleneck, giving them to his mother. She then encourages him to smoke it with her. Dr Shaheda Omar is Executive Director at the Teddy Bear Clinic. Dr. Omar, good morning. I mean, we know mandrax has a huge impact on adults. I mean, massive. I can't even begin to imagine the impact it would have on a young child.
Well, I think this is absolutely shocking, alarming, concerning, but also so sad that a 4-year-old has been subjected to this. And the video clearly shows that this is not an isolated once-off random incident, but that this child has been exposed to this more than once. And obviously the child is being socialized in a manner which is totally unacceptable, unlawful, unethical, but also compromising the health of this child, placing the child at great risk. As you say, the dangers associated with the consumption of mandrax. And for a little child whose brain is still developing, the prefrontal cortex is still developing, is absolutely, unthinkable. How can adults subject a child, never mind just engaging in drugs in front of the child, but engaging the child to participate in this process is totally shocking. But I think the one plus factor here is that if we look at the spirit of Ubuntu and the community response, where immediate action, prompt responses were addressed and JMPD came to the rescue, this speaks to the collective efforts of how we can protect our children to ensure their safety and protection, and as a whole come together to ensure that children do not face circumstances like this, the trauma that children are exposed to and the violations that they are subjected to.
Dr. Omar, we know from plenty of scientific evidence and studies over the years that when people under the age of 18 drink alcohol and sometimes actually develop addictions to alcohol at a young age, that impact lives on their brain, often for the rest of their lives. I would imagine mandrax, I mean, a very powerful drug. This is not dacha we're talking about, this is mandrax. Dacha has its own problems, of course. But I mean, the impact on a young brain could well be with this child throughout their entire life.
Indeed. I mean, if you raise such a concerning and worrisome point here, the damage to the brain, and if we just look at the neural pathways, the linguistic neural pathways of rewiring, reconfiguring, and predisposing or acting as precursors to future problematic disturbances in this child's trajectory, apart from the brain damage, but even, the addiction, and also in terms of psychological damage to the child in his behaviors. I think this is of huge concern. It could predispose the child to, besides the chemical addiction that the child would have to continue using drugs, there are also other precursors that would predispose the child to criminal behavior and other distressing and disturbing behaviors that would be manifested by the child. Self-mutilation, violence. One can continue ad infinitum around the negative impact of being exposed to drugs in this manner.
The other issue, I mean, is the normalization. You spoke about it a moment ago. They filmed themselves doing this. Now, look, they were high at the time, clearly, but they filmed themselves doing this. It's become so normal. This is what happens. I mean, this speaks to the real damage that we've seen in our community, that drugs do in our communities, and it perpetuates itself in moments like this.
Indeed. So the valorization, the grandiosity, I mean, the way that as we speak about the normalization, it's sending, what message is it sending to the community and to people, to other addicts out there? Of course, it's, like you said, perpetuating the cycle, unfortunately, at the cost and price of damaging children who are vulnerable, who are powerless, who are defenseless and helpless in this process. And what we see is then what we are faced with, and looking particularly at that community, it's rife with gangsterism, substance abuse, violence. And of course, you continue seeing this intergenerational patterns of violence, high school dropout, attrition rate, and delinquency and oppositional defiant behavior, the rebellion we see, because all of this becomes normalized into their behavioral repertoire without understanding that this is not acceptable. They grow up and this becomes the norm.
Communities in this way, so many people, they live in a terrible physical circumstance. There's often no hope. In some places, some parts of our country, people are almost forced to join gangs. In fact, are forced to join gangs literally if they want to stay alive. There have been many cases like that over the years. But the impact of all of the damage that this community is suffering from drugs, what impact does that have on a child, even a child who's hopefully not given mandrax at a young age? This must have such an impact on young people growing up. They should be going to school, should be encouraged to do their homework. Instead, there are drugs literally all around them.
Well, I think that the impact it would, that we are seeing working in that community as well. We work with children specifically in that community, and the challenges and the risks that these children face. As I mentioned, the loss of power and control, confusion, the confusion lending itself to trauma. So we're seeing a lot of children joining gangs for survival. As you said, go along to get along, to protect. It's about, if I don't join a gang, it means that we will be faced with violence and the power dynamics would come into place because they're trying to protect themselves, their families, and unfortunately, we find that these children find themselves in situations where they're not able to do anything about it. They continue with criminal activities simply because of the dynamics in the community. And we have to look at this from a systemic perspective. And one has to look at, being proactive and ensuring that we work on different levels, working with the children, working with communities, and with on different levels, the community-based organizations, the faith-based organizations, all have a role to play, and even law enforcement, I think, it has a huge role to play here, where children are exposed to consequence management, and a community, certainly, not only the children, but understanding that actions have consequences, and also understanding what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Unfortunately, the unacceptable becomes acceptable, and we are seeing the way it's normalized. So they don't know any better, they don't know any different. And of course, the impact it has, that many children drop out of school, unemployment, poverty, and then people children and adults resort to desperate and drastic measures, where in order to generate an income, it's becoming, whether they're selling drugs, ingesting drugs, pumping, and one sees all different shapes and forms of violence being committed in these type of communities.
So a child now, the police have confirmed, has been taken into care away from their parents, and I imagine, may well not see their mother again, would be very upset, very emotional. What kind of care is this child going to need? May even have to come to a court and testify against their parents at some point.
So a 4-year-old, yes, usually, firstly, an assessment would have to be done and containment of the child, because, separation anxiety could be something that the child would certainly display, because that is his mother, that is a bond that the child has had with the birthing mother, and that is something that needs to be addressed. So containment in terms of therapy, you are absolutely correct. And with children as young as 4 years old, play therapy. And then, of course, in the due course, assessments looking at how it has impacted on the child, how has the child suffered as a result of this, and looking at what would be the best for this child at this point in time. Of course, this child has, one realizes that the child is in need of care, the child is at risk, and placing the child back into the care of the mother or into, somebody that is not closely connected to the child could also not be in the best interest of the child. So I think a lot of work has to be done in terms of long-term planning. Of course, the immediate assistance and support has been the removal, and statutory social workers and, of course, psychosocial support, assessments, etc., would have to be conducted. So it's going to be a multidisciplinary approach to assisting, helping, and making decisions that would be in the best interest of the child in the long term.
Thank you very much indeed. The Executive Director of the Teddy Bear Clinic, Dr. Shaheda Omar.